with Austin Theory dropping his United States Championship to Bobby Lashley at Money in the Bank, only to return later on in the night to win the Money in the Bank. Some have noticed that this is something of a pattern for WWE, as this isn't the first time that a wrestler fell short earlier in a show only to wind up winning big later on. Now, how many times has this happened? Well, that's the subject of this episode, because today... Thank you to Edgar Perez and the rest of my awesome Patreon supporters. Thank all of you so much. Alright, so we just mentioned Austin Theory, and yes, I am still using his whole name. But aside from him, what other wrestlers have pulled this off? Well, before we get into that, allow me to ask that you please subscribe to this channel, and make sure you give this video a big like. Oh, and also, if you'd like to get your own shout out, please go over to my Patreon page to find out how. Alright, now with that being said, let's get into the list. Okay, so to start this list off on things that WWE repeats their patterns on, let's go to another pattern that they repeat, and sadly, we don't have to go back that far. To further add credence to the idea that WWE does this way too much, let's bring up something else that they do way too much, and that's Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. Going back as recently as earlier this year, Brock Lesnar found himself counting the lights after having a dream match with Bobby Lashley. However, after wrestling somebody new, Vince McMahon's booking radar must have gone haywire, as Lesnar resurfaced again as the number 30 entrant to the Royal Rumble, where he would then win the entire thing in order to face yet again Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. And despite this Mania match, we're still getting this match yet again. And somehow, there were people who complained when I said that this match happens way too often. Uh-oh, now I'm beginning to repeat myself. Anyway, while I'm still on Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, let's get into the next entry. Now, the first time that Lesnar and Reigns squared off at WrestleMania was back at WrestleMania 31, where nobody seemingly felt like Roman Reigns was ready to be WWE Champion yet, and that seemingly includes Vince McMahon, as the then Mr. Money in the Bank Seth Rollins would successfully cash in his title opportunity to become WWE Champion at the end of the night, and was the first wrestler to do so on the grandest stage of them all. But this wasn't the Architect's only WrestleMania match that year, as before that he wound up counting the lights for Randy Orton. And while there's absolutely no shame in losing to the Viper, I think by this point this was becoming something of a cliche, even though Seth winning was the best save for the Mania main event. WWE sure had a hard time getting things right with CM Punk, as they somehow managed to botch his return after he came back to TV following his pipe bomb promo and his victory over John Cena at Money in the Bank. This seemed like simple booking 101, have Punk return, beat John Cena yet again at SummerSlam, and call it a day. But too bad for Punk and us fans, because it seems like WWE must have missed out on that lesson. In the current jerk match of the night, Del Rio, R-Truth, and The Miz would be defeated by the team of Kofi Kingston, Rey Mysterio, and John Morrison. However, Del Rio also held the Money in the Bank briefcase. And then following the main event, where CM Punk did win the title even though John Cena's foot was on the rope, Kevin Nash for some reason showed up to powerbomb Punk, which was the exact cue that Del Rio needed in order to cash in his briefcase and become champion. Now eventually, Punk would pick up the title off of Del Rio at Survivor Series, but that was only after Cena and Del Rio played a quick game of hot potato with it. Yeah, in hindsight, I could see why this was so much better and easier than just letting Punk beat Cena straight away. That was sarcasm in case you couldn't tell. Okay, so this is a weird one, but it was probably the most obvious. After John Cena had to vacate his WWE Championship, Vince McMahon would start the pay-per-view off by simply handing the belt to Randy Orton. However, he would then have to defend it against Triple H, who would just end up taking the newly given belt off of Orton. Then, following a successful title defense against Umaga, Trips would have to put the belt on the line yet one more time, but now it would be against, well, Randy Orton. However, after this match, it would be Randy who was walking away victorious and with the WWE Championship. At New Year's Revolution 2006, we would see Edge become the opportunist that he was always meant to be. Starting the night off, Edge would unsuccessfully compete for the Intercontinental Championship against then-champion Ric Flair. Edge would get himself disqualified after he used his Money in the Bank briefcase to attack the Nature Boy, although this would not be the last time he would make use of the case, as later in the night, after the scheduled main event of the Elimination Chamber match for the WWE title, where John Cena would successfully retain his title by the skin of his teeth, Edge would cash in, taking advantage of the situation, giving the Rated R Superstar his first run with the WWE Championship. And with this dramatic cash-in, it would set the tone for many a Money in the Bank for years to come. Now, winning big for yourself is one thing, but what about winning as part of a team? Or how about as a part of an entire faction? Back in 2003, Evolution would become one of those heel stables that walked away completely draped in gold, and they managed to do so all in one night. At WWE Armageddon, Randy Orton would win the Intercontinental Championship off of Rob Van Dam, even with Mick Foley serving as special guest referee. But then afterwards, Batista would wind up losing to Shawn Michaels in a singles match. But determined to make sure that Evolution came out as all winners, Ric Flair came up with an idea, as he entered himself and Batista as a tag team into the Tag Team Turmoil match, which they won. And with Triple H winning the world title in the main event, all that glitters would wind up being gold for Evolution. Now, this isn't exactly a big win, but it still qualifies for this list nevertheless. Going back to the King of the Ring tournament in 2001, Kurt Angle started the night off by getting a victory against Christian in the semi-final round. But even though he did start off winning, he would lose in the finals against Edge, due to some outside interference from Shane McMahon. This prompted Kurt Angle to get a street fight with Shane, which turned out to be one of the best matches in King of the Ring history. And so, while the Olympic gold medal hero started the night off winning, and despite not winning the King of the Ring tournament itself, he still ended up victorious before the night was over. Now, while beating Shane McMahon isn't necessarily the biggest accomplishment, getting a victory in a match that overshadows the main event and the finals of the King of the Ring is still pretty good if you ask me. Now, for the most part, this is normally a heel maneuver, even though Brock was a babyface when he did it. Although, even with that being the case, you can still pull this off really well if you're a good guy, and you might even be able to pull it off better than anyone else. And what is probably the best example of this formula, and possibly the only time it's ever been done right, we have WrestleMania 10 and Bret the Hitman Hart. The show started with the Hitman going against his brother Owen, continuing their feud. However, this time baby brother would come out with the W, finally getting to beat his older brother and prove that he could do it. However, this celebration would be short-lived, as Bret was only wrestling Owen because he lost a coin toss to Lex Luger, who Bret co-won that year's Royal Rumble with. As a result, Luger would get first crack at then-champion Yokozuna, which he didn't win. This meant that Bret would get his title shot against Yokozuna in the main event, but to make sure things were all fair and even, Bret would also have to have a match too, since Yoko already faced Luger. And so, Bret got stuck with another case of sibling rivalry, only to close the show wearing the WWF World Heavyweight Championship around his waist and was hoisted up as the man of the hour, right in front of his brother. Although, that's not to say that Bret doesn't know what it's like to see somebody holding a world title at WrestleMania that should be yours. But that leads me to... Just 1 year prior at WrestleMania 9, and Hulk Hogan would be the one to walk away with the WWF World title, although he started the night off challenging with his partner Brutus the Barber Beefcake for the WWF World Tag Team Championship against Money Inc. Well, initially, it seemed like the Hulkster picked up the win for his team of the Mega Maniacs. However, the decision would be reversed, as Hogan used Brutus's face mask as a weapon. Therefore, Money Inc. would retain their championship and get the win via DQ. Although, this was followed up later in the night with Hulk Hogan accepting Yokozuna's challenge and taking his freshly won WWF World title in one of the most infamous moments in all of WrestleMania history. Well, there you go. 10 times that wrestlers didn't win early in the night only to win bigger later on. But what are some other examples of this happening that you can think of? And also, do you think that this is overdone? Let me know down in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe to this channel and leave a like, and spread the word about Dave Knows Wrestling, as I really do appreciate it. Anyway, thank you for watching, and thank you to my awesome Patreon supporters out there, and as always, Dave knows.